Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omer. Now, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and there couldn't be a better example than the story we're about to discuss today. Now, true to the letter, the idiom conveys the notion that a complex idea can be conveyed with just a single picture. This picture, which was taken earlier this month at the Ganda Singhwala border, a sleepy border town in Pakistan, you can see two men in their late 20s posing over a milestone showing the distance between Delhi and Ganda Singhwala. Now, it's caused much uproar in India when the Delhi police released the photograph, putting it up across several locations in the city, asking locals to be vigilant, to call the police if they saw these two individuals. And as it turned out, Tayyib and Nadeem were actually from Faisalabad. They're students of a religious seminary. This was confirmed by the seminary and authorities in Pakistan. Now, once this was confirmed, we get a chance to look beyond this headline and just contemplate what exactly defines the relationship between India and Pakistan and how does this reflect on the hysteria. So we've got our guest here, Mr. Ejaz Haider, the executive editor of Indus News and political analyst. And also from India, from New Delhi, we are joined by Mr. Siddharth Varadarajan. Excuse me for not getting your name right, but welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So let me ask you this. When you saw this picture crop up in the newspapers and across news channels in Delhi, what was your reaction? How was it covered by the media there?
You know, honestly, I have no idea about the provenance or the origin of this particular photograph. But it's a sad commentary on, obviously, the status or the state of intelligence gathering. If, I mean, no one can deny that there are real threats. But when you pick up two completely unconnected individuals through God knows what process, it just tells you how shoddy intelligence gathering can be. And, quite frankly, for all that we exaggerate the capabilities of our agencies on both sides of the border, we are dealing with, whether it's ISI, RAW, IB, whatever it is. We are dealing with a policing system that is pretty broken, that is pretty inefficient. And it doesn't surprise me if very low-level social media kind of inputs get magnified up the food chain and eventually get put out as threats. I think it's a sorry commentary on the state of intelligence gathering. This is not to say that there are not real threats,
right?
But just that it's a lesson for agencies to get their act together and not engage in putting out false information that at the end of the day will only serve to make the public less wary than more wary of actual real threats.
Okay, so Mr. Ejaz, let me ask you this. You saw the picture. What was your take on it? Apparently, you also were surprised this was in the news.
I was amused, and frankly, as Siddharth said, and I completely agree with him, that this is, in a way, it defines India-Pakistan relations. It also informs us of the kind of knee-jerk reaction that security forces can have. But let me just, on a slightly different note, just to add a bit of levity to this non-story, I would say, that two seminary students are so plugged into the social media that they actually get a selfie made or, get themselves snapped and then put it on Facebook.
Well, in all fairness, they said they didn't know how it made it on Facebook.
Well, somehow they might have, forwarded it on WhatsApp to a friend and he might have put it up on the Facebook. And once you have something on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, then it is around the World Wide Web.
Yeah.
And anyone can pick it up. But certainly for the Paharganj police, which is Paharganj is an area in Delhi, for that particular police station to put out these adverts and also put out the picture, informing the public that these are two terrorists on the loose, and obviously they are armed and dangerous, and therefore if anyone has any information, they should provide that to the Paharganj police station, is unfortunate as well as extremely amusing.
No, it's interesting to note also, I wonder, that the photograph itself had a caption that said, Fateh Delhi. And I don't know if that may be, because it also says Delhi is 360 kilometers away. So, I mean, it really, it's very confusing on what was going on behind their minds when they processed this information and assumed that they were terrorists within the city. But also, the whole idea, Mr. Siddharth, of talking about the story is to reflect on whether this is, like you said, your take on it was that shoddy intelligence not getting through appropriate channels, or wrong conclusions being made. But how much of it is really racial profiling?
Look, obviously, images circulate in one way or the other, and somebody, in order to earn brownie points, you don't forget that the policing systems on both our sides are heavily incentivized, so that if you play a role in identifying a threat, then you get a certain reward, or you're in line for promotion. So the system, unfortunately, rewards this kind of behavior. Is there an element of profiling? Sure. I mean, like, it's not a coincidence that a photograph of any two random blokes was picked up. I mean, wasn't picked up. The fact is that they looked a particular way, and they could be passed off, obviously, given the official imagination, given the public imagination. I would say on both sides of the border, even in Pakistan, for example, two seminary students with their shalwars hiked high and with lambi dadi would be more likely to fit the average stereotype of a militant or a terrorist than Muhammad Atta. So the fact is that there is profiling that happens in the minds of everybody. But I would come back to this. The fact is that the agencies themselves, this is a wake-up call for them, because if they are going to process this kind of half-baked information and then put information out in the public domain, this isn't the first time, as I said. I mean, not so much in the context of terror threats, but we've seen embarrassing situations when different government departments have tried to pass off photographs of Seoul, for example, as Ahmedabad, to show how much development work has happened in India. And even in the case of Pakistan, I mean, your former ambassador to the UN, current ambassador Malia Lodi, had this embarrassing situation where pictures of Gaza victims were passed off in a formal presentation as Kashmiri children. So, this kind of nonsense happens all the time, and I think that, maybe we are so eager in our two countries to clutch at any and every kind of information in order to run the other side down, or in order to fuel our own narrative, that even simple checks and balances which should operate are given the go by. So I would say that this is a cautionary tale.
It is a cautionary tale. I understand that, but when we look a little, like, there are various incidents, very amusing incidents, like crossing the borders, monkeys being adopted here, coming from India. I mean, I found this very interesting story in Times of India of a pigeon that even went through an X-ray to make sure that he didn't have any hidden chips or something or the other. But when it comes to the role of the media in India, how aware are they of crossing that line between propaganda and because, at the end of the day, it does get a lot of ratings. So where does the media stand on these kind of incidents?
Well, I could say that, as far as the pigeon incident is concerned, it was, from day one, it was a source of great humor and mirth, that the Punjab police was so paranoid that they detained this pigeon. They kept him in custody for, I think, several months, and clipped the poor chap's wings so that he couldn't fly back to Pakistan or something horrible like that. But yeah, the fact is that there are, against the backdrop of all that has happened as far as terrorist attacks are concerned, reporters would tend to err on the side of caution, right? So if somebody from the police is saying that there is a threat XYZ, independent of any means of verification that the media may have, they would tend to report this as a matter of fact, and it's only later that when you start digging and you get information, then it's important that you make that corrective. So I would say that the media in India, simply in the absence of any independent sources of information, and also because there is a certain mindset that has been inculcated over the past 2 decades, would tend to quite easily or quite readily believe what the police or the security agencies put out if they say that this is indeed a threat and these two gentlemen are about to plan terrorist strikes in Delhi, right? So this is obviously something for the media to also introspect on. But I would say, in the scale of false terror threats that we've had, real or imagined terror threats, this particular incident is something that will probably be a footnote in a course on policing or in a course on media coverage of terrorism a year or two from now.
So, Mr. Ejaz, what's your take on how fair media in Pakistan is when the same is applied, when there are security threats, real or imagined, as Mr. Siddharth says, in covering these events?
Unfortunately, not very accurate in terms of actually triangulating information, because a lot of the information that comes either from the security forces or from the police, one, given the speed with which television works or is required to work, you just don't have the time to take a pause and actually try and go out and try and corroborate that information from more than one source. And the best way, of course, of dealing with this kind of thing is to actually allow the story to mature. And also, if you're putting something out, and if you really do not have the time to get it corroborated or triangulated, then in all fairness, you should say that this is being claimed by X, Y, Z. And which essentially means that what you're putting out is not something, you're not putting your weight behind that. And so, and you can say that, you know, this is a story that we haven't really been able to investigate thoroughly, and but since this claim is being made by so and so, whether it's the ISPR or whether it's the spokesperson for the police or some other security forces, force, you just can't. I mean, we just put it out there,
Right.
and that is something which needs to change. Another example of this is that the Indian media reports on alleged Pakistani shelling across the line of control only on the basis of what the Indian army tells them. Ditto for us. We report the Indian shelling on the basis of what the ISPR puts out. Very often, we just do not have the time or the resources to actually go to that particular location and to independently investigate what exactly happened. There have also been, and this incident incidentally was reported, where the Indian Army took a group of journalists and they had actually stage managed the show. And I'm referring to this incident because it was reported, ultimately reported in the Jammu and Kashmir press. And what they did was that just before they arrived on the scene, they shelled the Pakistani positions. And they knew that in response, the Pakistanis will shell their positions. So after their shelling and after their provocation, when the Pakistani forces returned fire, that is the time when the group was brought in there and told that, look, this is what we've been saying, that the Pakistanis are aggressing against. But the other thing about the process, with reference to this picture, I don't think there was any process involved in this, because intelligence gathering is a very complex process. It happens through open sources, it happens through covert intelligence, through human, which is human intelligence, electronic intelligence, satellite intelligence, a number of other ways in which you pick up the chatter, you pick up the clues, and then, of course, you collate that and you analyze that. So it's a tedious process. In this particular case, I do not think any process was involved, because all they did was to see this picture on the Facebook,
Right.
or on some other platform, digital platform, and they decided that it will give them brownie points if they were to put this picture out. And now, whether this was done deliberately or whether this was because whoever at the Paharganj police station is a whatever cretinous idea that came to his mind and thought that, this is something that we can put out and it will create a certain kind of groundswell. But it's dangerous, because it's dangerous at two levels, because one, it makes people paranoid, but at the same time, it also reduces, because once the truth comes out, people realize that these forces are prepared to put out false information, and therefore, yes, and so the credibility is hurt, and I think that is something, because there are real threats.
Right.
I mean, Siddharth talked about real threats to India. We face these real threats in Pakistan every day, and so it is important for the security forces to be absolutely certain of what kind of information they are putting out.
Right, and not just like this picture definitely is a non-issue, like you said, one of the many incidents that have occurred in the past that kind of end up being more amusing than anything else. But what's really disturbing about it is the sentiment that continues to come from across the border, from within Pakistan, about every time, like the knee-jerk reaction you spoke about. And even and this continues, it doesn't seem to abate. Like if I were to just talk about this, the beating retreat, that's this over the top tableau that takes place every day at sunset at Wagah border by both countries, the soldiers, the whole. I mean, it just feeds into this sort of this spectators on either side of the country of this sort of innate hatred, competition. Like, how does this? Where does this come? How do we stop that from happening? And like, where do we bring it down? Like, it seems to be continuing non-stop.
Okay, so what happens, the ceremony at Wagah and also at Ganda Singhwala, from where this picture was taken, it's essentially an arrangement between India and Pakistan. This tableau, as you called it, rightly so. So for 30 minutes or 40 minutes, the two sides are going to, these are like plume-doomed birds.
Right.
And they are putting on a show. And for people, for the audience, it symbolizes and signifies a macho nationalism on both sides. For a more discerning person, it becomes a rather comical show because if you look at what they do with what is known as the goose step,
right,
where they raise the leg right up to the face of the other guy, in Indian and Pakistan Army drill procedures, the formal parades, there is no concept of a goose step.
No, but this is what I want to ask Mr. Siddharth. There's ceremony that takes place across the at the Wagah border and other parts. Like, how does this help in addressing this animosity between both countries? And doesn't it sort of encourage it amongst them, the populations? Mr. Siddharth, can you hear me? I think there's a technical glitch. But moving on, while we try and pull him back online, talking a little more about the knee-jerk reaction that either party has. The country, is this, you've been to India so many times. When you go and meet people in India, when you go out on the street, is this sentiment like across the board, or do you feel that maybe through media, through other outlets, it gets a little bit exaggerated?
I think it does get a little bit exaggerated because on the streets of Delhi, I mean, and other places that I've been to, generally to attend conferences, people are by and large hospitable. I've been there also in the wake of certain events that at least the Indians say have had a very deep psychological effect on them. There was Kargil and then there was the Mumbai thing. But by and large, or maybe the people that I have met belong to a different stratum and therefore are more civilized in their interactions. But at the conferences, it's also very clear to me that regardless of their political positions and their ideological positions, from the far right to the far left, there is the concept of India, and there is a sense that India has a tryst with destiny and that India has to project power. And I think for us who deal with security issues, this particular motif that runs through across the ideological lines.
Let me ask Mr. Siddharth about this also. We were just talking, we lost you on the line there for a second. We were just talking about what happens on the Wagah border and how that really feeds, whether it feeds into this sort of innate hatred that kind of inculcates again and again in the masses. We're talking about the ceremony that takes place between the soldiers. I wanted your take on that also, and then coming back to the conferences that Mr. Ejaz visits and his reading on the feeling on the street, so to speak. So what is your take on it?
You see, the ceremony at Wagah is it's a grotesque caricature of the abnormality which prevails between India and Pakistan. And I think tomorrow, as and when relations normalize and become more civilized, you will find that kind of idiotic ceremony also undergoing changes, quite frankly. So I wouldn't, you know, it's a symptom rather than a driver of a bad relationship. And I wouldn't, you know, spend any more time on that. But there are obviously perceptual issues. You know, the fact is that India and Pakistan need to constantly engage each other and to engage each other at every level. It's a pity that for the last 4 or 5 years, perhaps even longer, there hasn't been any proper official engagement. We've met unofficially in track 2. Both Ejaz Saab and I regularly take part in some of these meetings, and there are constructive elements which emerge in those conferences and meetings where suggestions are made from participants on both sides as to how the relationship could be moved forward. But unfortunately, today we are in a situation where certainly from the government of India's side, there is no willingness to engage. There's a lot of skepticism about what's happening in Pakistan, and of course, Imran Khan, as a new prime minister, is yet to find his feet. India is going into election mode. So I think that, for the foreseeable future, I don't see any of the ice melting at the official level, but that's no reason why programs such as what you are doing or what, Ejaz and I do at our level cannot work continuously to build a better understanding within India of what's happening in Pakistan and within Pakistan of what is happening in India and what Indian perceptions are.
Right, and especially in light of, if now we were talking about cross-border relations when academics and journalists go across and meet with each other, but also in light of rising sectarian and caste tensions that we've seen and been attributed to BJP, how does that speak also to the narrative that Muslims, the minorities in places like Uttar Pradesh feel threats?
Well, we are in a very peculiar situation in terms of Indian domestic politics, where national elections are 6 months away, and a ruling party or government which got elected on the basis of making very substantial promises on the development front finds that it's not delivered on those promises. So, as governments across the world do when confronted with failure in terms of delivery, they fall back on raking up all kinds of non-issues, raking up divisive issues, in the hope that the electorate wouldn't, look too closely at the actual record of governance. So what's happening in Uttar Pradesh or other parts of India, the sort of rising communal rhetoric, is essentially a last desperate throw of the dice in the run-up to the election. And I think most Indian voters also recognize and understand it for what it is. This is not to say that there aren't dangers, that this does not breed insecurity. It does. And I think that the vast majority of the population in India is deeply uncomfortable with any kind of divisive politics. But that's this is election season, and we are seeing this as a constant kind of campaign issue, regrettably, in the absence of any forward movement on actual development promises that the BJP made. So this is a reality, and I think it also complicates the India-Pakistan relationship because strident anti-Pakistani rhetoric is also part of this whole attempt to divert attention away from the lack of governance or lack of development on the domestic front. So we are in a tricky situation. All the more reason why the media and other stakeholders have to play a responsible role to ensure that all of these kinds of tensions which the political process is generating are kept within check and actually are countered in some way.
So Mr. Ejaz, besides media playing a more active role, being more responsible in reporting, what else needs to be done to make sure these kind of fake news don't aggravate the already tense relationship between the two countries?
Well, as far as the digital space is concerned, it's very difficult because there are no real rules and regulations to regulate this space. States have tried to bring in laws, but people have also objected to those laws on the basis of freedom of expression. Now, the very idea of freedom of expression is something which is a contested space. Where does it end? And so the jury is still out. And this is something, and I'm not just talking about the debates on the streets or among the commoners. I'm talking about conceptual and philosophical debates about the whole idea of freedom of expression and to what extent the state can be brought in or can be allowed to come in to regulate the space. Previously, when we used to do print, Siddharth has been the editor of The Hindu also, is now running a very responsible website, which puts out analyses and news. We used to go out, do a story, bring it in, and then make a sales pitch and the editors would question us, look at the story from multiple angles, and then decide whether they were prepared to run it or whether they're just going to shelve it.
Right.
Now, there were these filters, and it wasn't an unfiltered space. Now, as far as the social media are concerned, the various platforms, anyone with a cell phone can be out there saying something.
And while social media cannot be controlled, Mr. Siddharth, here I'm asking you this question. Now, these conversations still seem to be more constructive on levels where the state isn't involved. And I'm talking about these conferences, I'm talking about academics, professors, journalists. And then when there is a contentious issue that seems to be the main bone between both countries, Kashmir I'm talking about, how can we weave in state actors with academics and journalists to bring a more conclusive debate to the table?
Look, it's not as if we haven't managed to do this in the past, right? I mean, you just have to go back a decade ago to look at the kind of progress that first Musharraf and Vajpayee, and then Musharraf and Manmohan Singh made, even on the difficult question of Kashmir. So, we have the experience of the past before us. We have very concrete suggestions and proposals that both sides at one point in time found very acceptable. And it's a question of, creating the right bilateral atmospheric so that that process, threads of that process can be picked up again. I'm not a pessimist in the least. I think it's a question of the domestic temperature on both sides of the border reaching a certain proper level at the same time. So far, there's been sort of asynchronous. At a time when Manmohan Singh was somewhat strong, Musharraf lost power. Then, when Nawaz Sharif got,
so it's also, when you say domestic temperature, it's also dependent on the incumbent governments on both sides and what policies are, right?
Yeah, I think, you see, at the end of the day, I mean, we've seen within Pakistan that election after election, government after government, by and large, have gone to the hustings, have gone to the people with the promise of improving India-Pakistan relations. Now, in India, regrettably, improving India-Pak relations has never been a vote catcher. But I would say that in southern India or large parts of India, it's not as if anti-Pakistani rhetoric carries any weight either. So, there is a certain negativity which drives domestic politics, particularly at a time like this when we are in election season and you have the BJP, which is not confident of its domestic performance, so it would lean on a relatively hard line. So I think that, but the fact is that there have been times when even the BJP-led government under Vajpayee was able to move the envelope with Pakistan. And let's not forget that it's Vajpayee who went to Lahore, it's Vajpayee who went for the SAARC summit, who, the ceasefire on the line of control, which held for such a long time, and the beginnings of the Kashmir formula. All that happened at a time when the BJP was in power. So it is possible.
Right.
And the question or the challenge really is for us to somehow recreate that magic. And I think it can be done.
Right,
although
it can
now
be done, definitely. Okay, we've run out of time to your closing comments on this, but we'll take a quick short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire. Now, Pakistan could run dry by 2025 as its water shortage is reaching an alarming level. Now, these are according to a recent report by International Monetary Fund. Pakistan ranks third in the world among countries facing acute water shortage. Now, these reports by the UNDP and the Pakistan Council of Research in Water Resources, they have also warned the authorities in Pakistan that Pakistan will reach a shortage of water scarcity by 2025. Now, to discuss more on this, we have with us on the line Mr. Arshad Abbasi. He's a water and power expert. Welcome to the show, Mr. Arshad. Now, what is your take?
The report released by Pakistan Water Council is basically missing the so many data and so many. They have predicted without preparing any model. They have created hype and sensitized all over the world that Pakistan will run dry by 2025. This is entirely not the case. The issue is this: Pakistan is blessed with 5 rivers, and one of the rivers is the Indus, where the share of the snow melt and the glacier melt is more than 65%. And this is a very unique case. Unlike the other rivers in the region, like the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, and even Narmada in southern India, this is the only river where we can have the water, even even in the worst case, okay, let's say there is a total dry spell, like what happened in 2001 when we have the drought period. Anyhow, but at the same time, yes, we are facing serious challenge on the water storage. The more issue is actually growing population, and that growing population is really a threat for us. So to meet their food demand and even the water demand for the agriculture, because what can we offer for unemployment people, the unemployed people living in the villages? We can offer them an employment by offering them abundant water at their doorstep. And this is only possible when we build the dam. And when we talk about the dam, actually it's address multiple issues like the food security, generating the cheap energy, and the best answer, maybe the only answer.
Okay, Mr. Arshad, just sorry to interrupt you. Just hold that thought. Let me quickly introduce our second guest, Mr. Imran Saqib Khalid. Thank you for joining us here at Newswire. You're the head of Environment Climate Change at SDPI. We're talking about water shortage in Pakistan. We're talking about international reports coming in saying that Pakistan is about to face a very acute shortage of water. Now, what is your take on these reports, and how do you feel, how dire is the situation in this water-stressed country?
Thank you very much for having me on. Let me tell you a few things. The water that's come to Pakistan has pretty much stayed the same since our independence in 1947. Our population has gone up. The way we use our water has increased, but the water supply hasn't changed. The key problem when it comes to water is our governance and our management structures. That means we are wasting our water, and we're not wasting it when we say the water is going into the sea. We're wasting it by not using it properly. For example, our crops, our agriculture still use the water centuries-old way where we were flooding the fields. There are technologies now such as drip irrigation and more drop per crop, and unfortunately we're not doing that. The other problem is of equity. Some people have more water, some people have less. If you're well-to-do, if you're a larger farmer, if you're a member of the elites, you will have no problem, finding a golf course, golf, wash your cars. But if you're a poor person, even when you've had lots of water, you will still face problems in acquiring clean drinking water. The problem is of governance and not about availability. It's about access and equity that should be taken into account.
So, Mr. Imran, Mr. Arshad Abbasi, who's joined us also here, who's a water expert from the region, he challenges international reports, IMF, saying that Pakistan ranks third in the world in terms of countries facing a water shortage. What is your reaction to these reports coming in, giving really predicting a grim future for Pakistan, that by 2025 we're going to be very water stressed? Do you feel that maybe there is information or data that these reports are made on that is incomplete, or that they might not be very accurate?
Exactly. Well, see, the problem is not, as I said, about our availability. We've got the same amount of water that's flowing into our rivers as was in 1947. So I do not believe that, by 2025 we will run out of water. We are not going to run out of water.
But you did mention that the population rise does not, as the population increases, of course, there's a requirement of more water, in terms of directly or indirectly, whether because we need to meet the food demand.
You're right. So the population has gone up, but not to such an extent whereby our current water resources cannot, meet our needs. It's just that we've got enough water coming in. We are not utilizing it effectively. We've got enough groundwater resources. We've water flowing through our rivers. It's problem is not about availability. I'll repeat it again. It's about access. It's about equity, and it's about it's about management. So we've got the water policy now that talks about these issues. It talks about how having a groundwater authority take the issues pertaining to groundwater. It talks about clean drinking water. And so we need to move collectively towards better governance. And while building dams is important, storages are important, small dams, large dams, but even our wetlands are storages, our groundwater is a part of our storage system. So we need to think holistically about our water problems rather than saying that having one mega structure, a dam, will resolve our problems. That will not happen unless and until we start managing our water effectively. Let me give you an example that we have not
wait,
had.
sorry, hold that thought. I want to hear the example, but very quickly, I want Mr. Arshad's input on this in terms of the holistic approach that Mr. Imran is talking about. How much of this is getting translated into the government in terms of recognition, in terms of action plans, in redressing the water scarcity? Could you shed some light on this?
Yeah, actually, in 2002, I think the first time we made a hectic effort to check out a holistic water strategy. But unfortunately, after 2002, and when we mapped what is the gap and what was the strategy and what we have done, I think in 2012, our action is entirely different, much more different, but we have thought about it in 2002. The issue is again the capacity of the managers, water managers. Then they will as well. Let's say in 2005, I would like to share a personal experience when I was advisor to CDA in Capital Development Authority, the apex civic authorities of Pakistan. It's the water supply to this city, the capital, is from the three sources. And from the three sources, what actually water come into system and what is delivered to the people, we have found there is 60% leakage because of the old structure. And actually the same is true in case of our old irrigation system, even in the barrages as well. For example, there is a Khanpur dam, and this is dedicated to water supply to Rawalpindi and Islamabad. Would you believe that there is 70% leakage in the waterbed?
That's a really high number. 70% of water gets wasted.
Yeah. That this problem is highlighted for the more than 20 years, and even just 2 weeks back when I met the member Water Mapda, and he says that the problem is still persists and we are yet to address these issues. Actually, the real issue is the water management. But at the same time, mega structure is also necessarily. Why? Because it offers a lot of job opportunities in Pakistan. Let's say when you build the dam, Law Dam, it's mobilized more than 42 industries as well. So it's as a multiple impact. And at the same time, that with the growing population, the real issue is how to address the food security. Even in Pakistan, you see the onions and so many fruits, they are coming from the China, from the neighboring countries. And if this situation will be continued, then obviously will be face a big challenge how to meet the growing demand of the food. But let's me quote another example how bad we are in the water management. You have learned a lot of story, heard a lot of stories about the Thar. Would you believe is a neighboring state, Indian neighboring state in Gujarat and Rajasthan? They have managed for those desert areas so well. Everyone is not only getting the water, even they are contributing a lot toward agricultural product. So issue is actually water management, approach, capacity, and secondly, commitment. What I see when I come across with all the water managers or the bureaucracy, issue is lack of the commitment. Issue is their understanding of the subjects, and issue is a disconnect between the farmers, between the agriculture, with the practice, with the farmers, and with the ministry. This is a huge gap. Actually, really, this is a challenge. And to meet this challenge, 5 years ago, World Bank offered a very good project. They sent a grant of, I think, more than 3 billion rupees for the capacity building. But even after passing the 5 years, even the people that got a lot of training from all over the country, even from the Egypt, they are capturing each drop of water. The feed production per hectare is been a model for all. Even the people go into the Holland. But unfortunately, again, we have failed to replicate those experience here. Although we are much more fertile land. I don't want to go into detail, but any of the pH value of our soil is much more better than India, and much more better than Egypt. And look at this. Look at the model.
And we're taking it for granted, it seems. You talk about management, you talk about government efforts not coming through or not even starting to begin with. Mr. Imran, let me ask you this. Pakistan has from international reports which are being contested, but it continuously gets labeled as the 4th highest rate of water use in a per capita sense. Now, what I'm trying to ask you here is that when we translate this into what is happening on the ground, are people aware of the usage of water, whether they're being efficient about it or how dire the situation is? What is your take on it? Do you feel that people are maybe not in Pakistan not aware how they're using water is very inefficient?
Yes, unfortunately, that's a very good question. Unfortunately, we are not. And one of the reasons has to do with the politics and keeping people happy. 90% of our water goes towards agriculture. And farmers are taking their share of water or even in excess of that, even if they're not growing any crops, for example. And the reason is that the water is available at very low rates. The Abiana or the water charges has not changed significantly since the 1970s. So it's very cheap, and water is very cheap to get. Same thing in our urban areas. People have, they get municipal water. If that runs out, they've got motor drills into the groundwater and they access groundwater that way. And so it's not a problem, especially for the rich, for the well-to-do. The water is really a problem for our poor and the vulnerable communities. People who have to go walk miles or go to filtration plants and try
Right.
water. But until and unless it becomes a problem for all of us, we won't be able to resolve this issue.
Right.
Secondly, I wanted to highlight one aspect, and that is the way we manage our wastewater. So our industrial waste and our municipal waste finds its way into our natural streams and rivers and pollutes the water that we already getting through natural systems. And so our polluted water then damages our crops, it damages our health, and that's also an issue that needs to be taken into account.
Okay, Mr. Arshad, let me ask you this. While we've pretty much got a sense of what is happening in Pakistan in terms of awareness and management, which seem to be the key issues here, what can we learn from countries abroad? What can we see them doing better in terms of, and if we were to take examples of countries that have been water stressed and have come back from that, and what examples can we emulate in our system?
The best example again, one is Israel, that how they are managing the water, how efficient they are. The per capita water availability is hardly 400 meter cube per person. But they have set a brilliant example, a precedent for us, how to manage the water and how to get the maximum yield from minimum water. And another example is Indian Punjab. This Indian Punjab, that is breadbasket for the whole India. Mm-hmm. And still they're growing, their yield per acre is, immaculate, unmatchable. But the most important, where we can benchmark our best practices is basically in the South Africa. South Africa is more water stressed than Pakistan. But one issue which highlighted by the Imran is Abiana or the water charging. Water pricing all the world is mostly failed as far as agriculture use is concerned. Yes, of course, in the municipal area, before partition, there are two cities, Ahmedabad and the Murray Hills, where the during British Raj, each house is provided with water with a metering to quantify the water. But no, in the Pakistan, even in Islamabad, Karachi, and all big metropolitan cities, there is no metering system, and that they serve with a flat bills, and this is the real problem.
And even if there is a metering system, though it's not a metering system, even though there is a tax system on water and utilities, it's so minimal that it really doesn't make any difference, does it? So
small locality, you have charged the same bill with a ordinary consumer. We're in the posh sector where a person has even the swimming pool and all the facilities, even they are served with the same, uniform bill or same bill. This is actually a great anomaly. The municipal corporation, the municipal authorities, civic authorities, they have failed to set up a model of how to supply the water in multiple cities according to the use. And we in Pakistan, there is a slabs while we are served, we are consuming gas and electricity, there is slabs. And I think 10 years back in CTA, we have agreed, yes, water will be supplied to all consumers, but with a water slab. Why? When you consume high, obviously you supposed to be you're supposed to pay the more bill as compared to an ordinary person who have just a house, a very small house, and he consume very less. So lack of the metering system and failure in managing the supply system, especially addressing the leakage, is a really, really challenging issue in the municipal areas.
Right. And Mr. Imran,
As far part which I got, when we talk about the efficiency of the irrigation system, there's so many people that talk about if there's a leakage in the canal like this. Actually, they forget one point. These our canals, they recharge our ground aquifer. Let's say if we have lined all the canal in the Punjab and in the same, what will be happen? Our ground aquifer will be less charged, and obviously we have to pump then more depth, and this will be creating a lot of problems.
okay, so but let me come back to Mr. Imran quickly, since we're out of time. I want to ask you this: for someone, for a country like Pakistan, which is solely dependent or mostly dependent on its agriculture, how do we manage a better irrigation system? You talked about how there were inefficiencies and it was redundant, it was old technology. How do we improve it in light of what countries abroad are doing successfully?
First of all, there is a real need to go into the field and collect data. Data in terms of how the water is being used, what kind of crops the farmers are using, what kind of crops the farmers are growing, and how they're doing it. Mm-hmm. So we need studies on that, and then we need to go and start addressing them. And then we need to, try and build the capacity of farmers in terms of using only the required amount of water that farmer needs. I agree with the last stuff. Canal needs to stay in the canal, and what happens? Farmers withdraw water from the canal. They can perhaps use 50% or even less.
Besides data, what other actions do we need to take?
We talked about data. The second thing is, of course, capacity building of the farmers, and thirdly, we need to get the agencies and the organizations within the government that are looking after water resources to talk to each other. So that would mean the IRSA, which is the Indus River System Authority, is talking to the irrigation departments in each of the provinces. WAPDA is talking to the irrigation departments. They're talking amongst and between each other, and then they're also communicating with the Ministry of Water. And, that would help us start off in terms of addressing the recommendations that came into the water policy earlier. Which should be a good starting point in terms of resolving some of the problems that we are facing with our water resources.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Imran. Thank you, Mr. Arshad Abbasi, for giving us your input on how the government needs to be looking into water scarcity in Pakistan and how real are these concerns even. And that's all from Newswire. We'll see you next week.